Hey everybody, welcome to the Daniels on Research. I'm David Daniel.
I'm Daniel Willingham. This is a podcast where David and I take an article that we think would be interesting for you to know about for its applicability to the classroom.
And I picked the article this week, and I'm very happy to have done that. I'm actually culling from a literature I've contributed to quite a lot, which is the scholarship of teaching and learning. For those who don't know that, it's roughly akin to action research. These are usually teachers who are trying to do interventions in their classroom and assess whether they work and how they work and those sorts of things. It ranges from, if I shake their hand when they walk into the room, does that build better rapport that then reflects in their grades, all the way to implementation of science of learning and other sorts of things. So it's a broad literature.
Right, and a nice contrast for what we've been doing, which has been much more directly laboratory-based. So what have we got going this week, David?
Well, we have an article from 2017, and it's looking at something that's relevant actually to teachers across the spectrum, which is retrieval practice, or the testing effect. The title is Ecological Validity of the Testing Effect, the Use of Daily Quizzes in Introductory Psychology.
Nice. Okay, great. Yeah, testing effect has been huge in the last 10 years or more. So this is going to be great to see it at work in a classroom.
Right. And sorry, to be clear, retrieval practice is the new name of the testing effect.
Right.
So it came out as a testing effect in earlier, well, not when it came out with Ebbinghaus. It came out as a testing effect pre-Castle grants.
And I'm talking about the Socrates testing.
Right. Not that one. Okay.
Not that one. Okay.
That's one trial learning. It didn't work out so well.
Yeah.
We're really talking about here is the retrieval practice was known as retrieval practice now. And the reason they changed the name is because we're in a high stakes testing society, and saying the testing effect is not a good thing. You don't want that to happen.
Right. It was definitely bad advertising. And also, to be fair, it's more accurate to call it retrieval practice, because they were also emphasizing, look, the important thing is to get into memory and rummage around and try and find stuff. You might do that because of a test, but there might be another reason you're doing that. You might be working on a project or something, and you're still trying to retrieve information, and we would expect you'd still get this boost to memory, right?
Yeah, it's quite a naturally occurring process that occurs across multiple modalities, not just on tests. So
right.
It's not just a branding issue. It's actually a more accurate name for something that could have broad appeal and broad use.
That's right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what the...
Yeah. Let me get into that. And happily, this is one of those experiments that's pretty straightforward to describe. So what we have are two classrooms taught by two different professors. These are introduction to psychology classes with about 35 students in each. And David, this is the first thing that caught my eye when I was looking at this study, is that we've only got two classes. We're going to have one classroom that's the experimental group that's going to do the quizzing, and then we've got another that's a control group that's going to be very comparable but is not going to have the quizzing. And normally we would think of having more classes than just two. So is that typical for this type of research?
I wouldn't say it's atypical.
Okay.
So when you're doing things in real life with the constraints of having to have the job you're doing to do the research as a teacher, you're going to have to make some compromises. And that plays back in how confident you can be in the results and what has to be done next to clarify what just happened. So
right.
If I had been done in the same class, then we have issues with the kids being exposed to both conditions. Two different classes, same teacher, different times, different students. How do I know it was equals? Kids after breakfast. There's always something you can do in real life that you can't control for, that someone can come at you with. And
right.
That actually takes a lot of teachers out of doing this sort of research, because the what if makes you start asking the question, what if? Stop it.
Right. And this is something, I'm sure you'll agree with me, this is something that when you're a psych major, you learn about these principles. You learn, if you read an experiment like this, someone will point out to you, well, look, there was the quizzing and the non-quizzing, but then the quizzing professor was different than the non-quizzing professor. So if they do better on the test, maybe it's just that that professor was better. And usually when you're about a sophomore or junior, you get really good at picking apart articles like this. You get really excited about it. And then you get kind of crestfallen because, as you say, like, you can always pick on everything. There's always something wrong with everything. So we do have to sort of, take it all in context and recognize no study is perfect. And so we're sort of trying to balance our confidence in the results with our desire to learn something.
And that's why we have science, because there always is a what if, and we want to carefully look at that. And you raise an interesting question about people who know a little bit about research methods going a little overboard and picking everything apart, right? For example, there wasn't a kid exactly like mine in the sample, therefore we can't do this. You want to look for meaningful differences. Is there a reason why this is a meaningful difference for your confidence in this, in these findings, not just a difference?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me carry on with the description of the study here. So we've got an introduction to cognitive psychology class. They're using the same textbook. They're administering the same exams. There are going to be 3 exams over the course of the semester. And then the difference between the 2 classes is going to be daily quizzes. The quizzes are 5 items. They're multiple choice questions, and they are daily. So, I mean, there probably was a day or 2 off, like the very first class or something like that. But, the article says they're daily. So that's quite a lot. And they add up to something in terms of the student's grade. So all told, it's 25% of your grade, these quizzes that you're asked to do. David, I see you sort of reacting to the 25%. That's unusual, I take it.
That's unusual. Usually you're doing these things, low stakes testing, because they're not, the goal is the exam. And what I'm using this is for formative feedback, or in this case, for an intervention. And too much grade credit kind of sometimes will cut down a student's ability to benefit from what you're truly trying to do.
Right. So you're trying to make it worth their while, that they're really going to engage and not just completely blow it off. But you don't want it worth so much credit that they're either going to stress about it or what? Possibly
or cheat.
Or yeah. Okay.
Yeah. If it's high stakes, then they want all the points. Right. If it's too low stakes, they don't take it seriously. So teachers constantly are trying to thread that needle. How much to make them do it without making it too much of a big thing.
Right. Okay, so that's the independent variable, is presence or absence of quizzes. Then the other thing to know is that we're going to be looking at test performance, but there are 3 different types of items on these 3 exams that they have over the course of the semester. One type of item, they're going to repeat a question that appeared on a quiz, so it's identical. Another, it's going to be similar. So it's going to test the same concept, but it's not going to use exactly the same question. And then the third is going to be brand new. So it's a concept that didn't appear on any of the quizzes.
And that's kind of the quiz control right there, right?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Yeah, that's their control.
And let me go into why this is kind of important.
Please.
This is being done by teachers for a reason. All right. Some of the older work and the testing effect or retrieval practice was with identical questions. So I give you a quiz on these questions. Does that enhance your ability to do the test with the exact same questions? That's interesting from a scientific point of view, but from a teacher's point of view, we call that cheating.
Right.
So you give the kids all the questions from the test, give it to them a bunch of times, then give them the test. Guess what? They do better.
Right.
Woo! All right.
Right.
So that's not necessarily something a teacher is going to glom onto. As the literature developed, we want to know, can I give them similar things to retrieve than what's on the test? So it's not identical.
Right.
And we've looked at, structural differences in the way the test is put together versus the content versus the topic, all these different sorts of things. A teacher's asking, look, we got quiz banks, right? We got these resources. Can I use these in a way that helps me get this effect in my classroom? So
right.
Similar stuff. So stuff on Pavlov, but not the same question as the identical one.
Yeah, and to put it another way, when it's identical question, as you said, like whoopee, like you kind of know, like it'd be weird if they didn't do
right.
better. But if the retrieval practice is really doing what it claims to do, which is the memory representation is somehow richer, then certainly they should be able to answer questions that are on the same concept. Even if the question itself is new, they should be able to answer those questions.
Right, and that's a big deal to a teacher, because I could design my quizzes to set up my exam without giving away the questions that are going to be asked.
Right. So in that context, let's have a look at the results. And you can see we'll put the graph up here for you of the results. First, look at those stippled bars there. That's the control group. These are the people who weren't quizzed. And you can see the 3 different types of question items don't make any difference to them, as they shouldn't, right? This is all those questions should be equivalent. They're all at about 60%. Then the filled bars, these are the kids who took the quizzes. And as we said, you get this big, rich effect on the identical questions. That's not surprising at all. And then a nice, robust effect on the similar questions, as we were saying. That's what we would hope would happen, and it does. But then the really surprising effect here is performance on the new questions. So people who took quizzes over the course of the semester are doing better on the exams on concepts that were not quizzed. So David, what's going on with that?
All right, I'm glad you asked, because the authors and the title don't pull that out as an area of focus. The area of focus is really the difference between the identical questions and the related questions. Right? But again, if you remember the chart, what we saw was this big difference between quiz and no quiz, and then a little bit extra if the questions were identical or related. Right, so we get like a 13-point hit just for giving quizzes when the quiz questions have nothing to do with what's on the test, something to do with your reading, but nothing to do with the test questions. That's interesting, because what this shows is there's something that could be separate from retrieval practice that's important for us to know about, which we'll call for today a quizzing effect. The quizzing itself, not the content of the quiz, did something to help the students learn 13% better.
Right. Because it makes perfect sense, as you said, like, I give you questions on Pavlov, you can answer other questions on Pavlov more effectively. But I give you questions on Pavlov, and then you're better at answering questions about Piaget. That makes no sense at all.
Especially since they're in different chapters. Yeah.
And that can't be a retrieval practice effect, right? That's got to be something else. So you're calling this the quizzing effect.
Yeah, there's a deep literature on this. I contributed to it earlier in my career. Thomas Brothan did some really neat stuff in the late 90s and early aughts, where he was trying to take this quizzing effect apart, and we've seen it for years. All right, most of us know that if we have a quiz every day in class, we're going to prepare for that quiz every day in class.
Right.
So the quizzing effect is making me study differently. I'm now going to class prepared. Right. There's where the quizzing effect comes from. I actually read before class. Reading before class has benefits, apparently. Maybe it gives you an organizer for the presentation in the classroom. Maybe it spaces out your reading because you read it once here. Now when you're studying for the test, you've already seen that stuff before. There's something going on with exposing yourself to the material pre-lecture that has lasting effects all the way to the exam, and has nothing to do with the added benefit of maybe designing it for retrieval practice.
Yeah, and I mean, you phrased it as exposing yourself to the material before lecture, but it may be like doing the reading at all. It may be for some students showing up at all. And I'm reminded of an article that they actually refer to this article. It's Pennebaker et al., which I think came out in 2013. I learned about that article from a coverage in the New York Times. And in the New York Times, they were interviewing one of the authors of the study. And the author of the study said, like, yeah, we're giving these quizzes all the time. And so some of the kids are saying, like, well, I can't go out drinking with my friends because I know there's going to be a quiz tomorrow. I got to make sure I do the reading. I got to make sure that I wake up and go to class.
Right, and that's the quizzing effect. That's what I'm calling the quizzing effect. And the different distinction I'm making today is the quizzing effect changes my study behavior, as opposed to having I'm not talking about the cognitive impact of what that does. It's actually changing what I do to prepare for class, and that has lasting impact. And I think Tom Brothan showed this. John Broida and I showed this in an article, but it's about a 10 to 14% increase is what we were finding back in early 2000s. And this is 13. It's right in that range. 13. So it seems to be fairly robust over time. And what we were trying to do back in the early 2000s was figure out there's always, we always see this in a control condition for the class. Now can I get it back on the web? Right? Can I use this with my course management system? And for a long time, we couldn't get the same hit on the course management system, but we got it in the classroom. And that's because students on the course management system sometimes will optimize their performance in other ways. So there's ways to control that.
They collaborate with other students to answer the questions. Like, you do it, like you and I would make an agreement, like you do it this week and text me the answers, and then I'll do it the next week. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, things like that. Looking.
Use the very polite term, optimize their performance in other ways, which was a little vague. So.
Well, the reason I did that is because I did
make sure I understand.
No, I did a study on this, and I couldn't go into the class and say, "Hey, kids, how did you cheat?"
Yeah.
So I would say, "Hey, you're doing great on the quizzes. How are you optimizing your performance?" Boom. I got all this stuff. Some of them were doing what you're saying. They were doing screen grabs and sharing them. Lockdown browser helps with that. They were looking them up in their books and notes. So cutting time on that. Tom Rothen's study actually showed around 30 seconds, a little over 30 seconds per question, decreased the amount of time that people were cheating, but didn't decrease performance for the ones who weren't, who didn't have accommodations. So this has actually been really thoroughly kind of teased apart. Even on the online version of it hasn't been teased apart so much since students started having multiple devices. Mm-hmm. So I could put a lockdown browser on here. I could do this on here now, but you got a phone, right?
So that was going to be my next question. Is there currently a way of doing this in a course management system that seems to be effective?
There's a way. There's nothing out there right now that says it's ineffective. The key to the course management system is the low stakes. Low stakes discourage them from having to work too hard to go around it, right? So low stakes quizzing, Maki had 10% or so, somewhere around there seems to be ideal.
I also know, you can do it in class, and a lot of my colleagues, I haven't done this, but a lot of my colleagues will use clicker systems for this and just devote the first 5 to 7 minutes of class to a little 5-item quiz.
You could do that. You could also, if you use Canvas, Blackboard, or something, as long as they bring their devices to the class, you could open it up with something right there that they take on their devices. Clickers are notoriously not the best thing in the world to use just for assessment, but they're definitely good use for this.
Right. So did they get into this in this article? I'm thinking about table 1, where they had this little quiz or interview with students, or survey, or whatever you would call it. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, they actually, what's interesting about this study is they spent so much time talking about this effortful retrieval as being the core finding. That if people try to retrieve, and right in line with retrieval practice literature. Yeah. But their qualitative data didn't really talk about retrieval. So some of the questions they were asking, and we're showing you table 1 right now, the daily quizzes helped me study for the exam. That's not retrieval.
Right.
The daily quizzes encouraged me to read more in this class than my other classes. That's reading. The daily quizzes reduced the amount of cramming for the test compared to other classes. Yeah, I've been exposed to it before. The daily quizzes required me to distribute my course readings more evenly. I don't know how that's operationalized, but they said, yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
The spacing of the quizzes prompted me to change my study habits in the class. Right? So all of these things had to do with their study habits. And there's always that section in a journal article where they say, here's our findings, but here's how other potential reasons why we could have got what we got. So This is actually in the other potential reasons we got what I got. What other plausible explanations? I know that because they use the word plausible.
Right.
So it's right there. And one of the things they said was more plausible possibilities are the daily quizzes promoted more engagement with material or more time studying in the quiz class and the control class. More could be, as you said, 0 to something.
Right.
And specifically, if the quiz class reviewed the text modules before quiz and also before the exam, that's spaced out 2 times. Right. So they were going into a science of learning explanation for that. I'm still sticking with my behavioral sort of explanation. It just changed their study habits.
Right.
But that's in there with the quotes from the students. It's in there as a possibility from the authors. They chose to focus on the other 2 graphs, so the other 2 bar charts. I'm focusing on the one thing, the most impact, 2/3 of it came from just quizzing unrelated material.
Yeah, that's the part that's really striking to me, the way you put that you get this 10-point, 15-point boost from just doing the quizzing, which almost certainly seems to be, as you said, like, making sure that I'm doing the reading, doing the reading on time so it's distributed and so on. And then for retrieval practice, you get a boost too. It's about half as big as the quizzing effect. So where do we stand on this, David? We started this conversation and talking about action research and about the benefits and the limitations of doing this type of work. So I'm hoping you're going to comment on two aspects of that. One being the sort of how educators should think about the status of this research and what they should take action on or not. And then second, where you think this ought to go if you're a researcher.
Well, this is really important research, and I think that a lot of people, because it's messy, will what if it to death. Research in context, whether you're talking about looking at animals in the wild or anything, is going to be messier and therefore hard to get down to the actual cause and effect relationship. So for teachers, this is important because it's done in the service of teaching, number one, which is important. And it also models what you can be doing in your own class to evaluate your own methods. Mm-hmm. The take home from this is, look, there's an effect here that's really not a whole lot of time for me, maybe, and that I can get the impact. And that time thing's important because the reason we work so hard to try to get the quizzing effect online is because quizzing takes 10, 15 minutes out of your class.
Right.
And if I'm doing a high school, that's 10, 15 minutes out of every class.
Yeah.
It gets to be arduous. So
right.
The teachers have to have very practical concerns about, do we have the time for this? What is it taking out of my class? All those sorts of things. Plus, can I design, for example, if I get 13% for just a quiz, then I got to spend even more time trying to develop questions that map backwards from my exam. Is it worth that extra little bit to do that extra if I could do this and get this much?
Right.
So those are all values questions and almost economic questions that a teacher has to ask about. Can it fit into my practice without hurting other things, cost benefit sorts of things.
Right.
So a study like this has a lot to offer a teacher. It also has the caveats, right? That it was messy, and I thought the effect was retrieval practice, but there's an alternate explanation. What if I do go with retrieval practice? And I think that's when I start doing that, and I start giving a bunch of quizzes. Maybe I'm not doing retrieval. Just giving quizzes is not retrieval practice.
Not the same thing, right?
Right. And I think a lot of people do that.
Another thing that occurs to me when you're talking about what would be worth it to a teacher and thinking about teachers' goals, this is very fact-based memorization type course. That's what Introduction to Psychology really is. There's a lot of vocabulary to learn. You got to get this stuff under your belt in order to sort of move forward. Not every course is like that. And so I could imagine that a teacher the retrieval practice part may be of very little interest to the teacher because they're not that excited about the students loading up on a lot of factual content in this particular course, but they are interested in students keeping up with the reading and staying engaged with the course. And so the quizzing effect may be most of what they're interested in. And so that would be a circumstance where, as you put it, that little extra bit they would get from retrieval practice would be worth very little to an instructor. But the quizzing effect could be really important.
Yeah, we actually did a study you just reminded me of that, where after the quiz, we did the quiz before class or after class, right? Thinking that after class they might get more right, or it may benefit them because they've had an explanation. Why should I be there as a teacher if they can get it all from the book?
Yeah.
And it turned out that the students who had it after class studied differently. They looked at the quiz as a cue for what would be important to study for the exam. So they got the stuff around what they were cued to in the quiz better on the exams, but none of the other stuff very well. They actually used the quiz to try to game the instructor.
Right.
Right. Whereas a pre-lecture quiz, you can't do that because you don't know what the priority is going to be.
Right. Right. Oh, that's an interesting finding.
Yeah, there's lots of really cool nuances on this.
Anything else you wanted to get into on this article?
No, I think that we had a nice discussion about bigger things too. And this article has something really neat in it as a model for how to do research. Even if it's messy, it still needs to be done. Action research or solo research. We need to have more systematic replications because of the messiness.
Mm-hmm.
And that could kind of compensate for that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see that right now. We see a lot of one-offs where people do this and people don't follow up on that.
Right.
This one at least did something that a lot of people don't do, and this one tried to tie what they found in their classroom back to a theoretical model, saying this is why I think I saw what I saw in my classroom.
Right. Right.
That's another thing that Sodal and action research needs to look at is tying this back to why it worked, not just that it worked.
Right. Well, great. I
All
think
right,
we'll leave it there. Thanks for watching and listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.